David, thank you so much again for joining the conversation. I appreciate your time so much.
Thank you.
We are in our season of intentional living, and for the month of February, I decided to celebrate Black History Month by getting comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. And I believe that for those kinds of conversations, it is extremely important to be able to articulate things in a mindful way.
Mm-hmm.
And so who better to have these kinds of conversations with than an anti-racist psychotherapist who specializes in treating trauma and improving resilience in everyday people, and who also happens to be the author of a book called Black Meditation, Mr. David Archer.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. Yeah, just looking forward to talking a bit about this book, and also just talking about the deep, not only resilience, but the beautiful spirit that exists in everybody. Yeah, so what's the first question that you got?
Yeah, well, as I read your book, the word that keeps popping into my mind is awareness. I feel like there's a deep sense of awareness throughout the book. And I've highlighted, for those of you who can't see, I'll probably put this on YouTube, but I've highlighted so many, like there's so many references that I've highlighted throughout the book because it's so full of knowledge. It's spewing out of the book.
Thank you.
And so I hope you don't mind if I reference it throughout the conversation.
No, I encourage it, actually.
Okay, perfect. because I'm going to be throwing in some of what you say in the book before I ask you any of my questions.
Sure.
So the first question, and I'm going to quote here from the book before I ask you the question, bear with me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there is mindfulness, but I was kind of hesitating if I should quote this part, but anti-racist psychotherapy sees reprocessing the mental health and social consequences of racial trauma as possible through a variety of methods and frameworks for analysis, including family systems theories of communication, the neurobiological impact of chronic stress and adverse childhood experiences, the adaptive information processing model of eye movement desensitizations, I've heard of that one, therapy, as well as an understanding of memory reconciliation. I loved that part of the book. And a little bit further, there was a reference to mindfulness. Mindfulness relates to the idea that while suffering is a part of life, we can find ways of navigating it. Sometimes when we notice our challenges, we can gain perspective on them. Instead of having an automatic reaction to them, we can come up with solutions we otherwise would not have considered. So I loved that part of the book as well. And my first question would be, what led you to write the book? And it's a two-part question. And do you think that all Black people need some form of anti-racist psychotherapy in some way or another?
Interesting. Well, first, if I can just show that the first book that came out before Black Meditation was Anti-Racist Psychotherapy, Confronting Systemic Racism and Healing Racial Trauma. The reason why I wrote that book is because before being a therapist, I'm an artist. Okay, and as an artist, what typically takes place is that you feel as if you're compelled to create things. So that's me. So I'm a person that I feel as if I just like to especially create the thing that I haven't seen before. And during my clinical training, I realized that whenever I was learning to be a therapist, there was more of a focus on how to treat white people, but they wouldn't say that. So instead, they would just have one class that's devoted towards cross-cultural treatments. And when you're working with different people and talking about cultural competence, and in my head, I felt as if I was always learning how to do this cross-culturally, because you guys are never mentioning Black people. You never spoke about race in my training. So there'd usually be one slide or one class where they're going to have one slide where they would say, this is what it's like to work with Black people, and Black people are like this and all that stuff. So for me, outside of my training, I noticed that being a Black person who was looking for a therapist, there'd be some times where I would seek out a white therapist, and sometimes I would say something about race, and then the white therapist will be like, well, no, that's not true. I have a friend who believes there's no racism. And then I would instantly get the urge to walk out of the door and go and never see this therapist again. And so as I became, in my own private practice, as I became more skilled, and as I started to learn about memory reconsolidation-based forms of therapy, other therapies that are more neuroaffective, meaning they involve the brain and the mind and the emotions and the body. So not as much talking about the things, but being able to experience different things. I started to, I started to find that some of my Black clients would say things like, you know, I've been looking for this approach for a long time. I've been looking to meet with a Black man for a long time. It'd be Black women, it'd even be white people who were looking for an approach that's different from the status quo. So after the George Floyd protests took place, because I read a little bit about like history, and so I knew that there would be a little bit of this burst of social justice movement and action and motivation, but there's this phenomenon called white lash, where the homeostatic balance of saying we're going to go for social justice, it lasts for a certain amount of time, and then after we lose steam on it. So they're going to spray paint Black Lives Matter on the streets, but we live in Montreal. We know the weather around here doesn't really do well to paint on roads. Even snow destroys the roads, and there's potholes everywhere. Every Montrealer knows this is a terrible place to drive. It will
disappear, yes.
Yeah, everything, even the road disappears because of the snow. So what happened is, not surprisingly, is that there's been a little bit of a slowdown for movements relating to racial justice. Now we have other things that have come up. So I wanted to write something that I knew was going to last for a long time. As an artist, I wanted to make something that I would be able to share with others. And I also wanted to reach the clients that are outside of my arm's length, outside of my office's length. And so anti-racist psychotherapy is the philosophy. Black meditation is the application of the philosophy for people who do not have access to a therapist and also want to strengthen they want to get in touch with that inner beauty and that inner strength that is there as well. I think that answered the first part of your question. What was the second part? Yes,
the second part was, do you think that all Black people need some kind of therapy like this in some way or another, some extent or another?
Not everyone. Not everyone is going to need one form of therapy. And I also believe that while I've written the book Anti-Racist Psychotherapy, there's a lot of other people who've spoken about forms of psychological therapies that relate to an idea of Blackness or race. Dr. Naeem Akbar is like a person who did that years ago. Even Frantz Fanon is a person who spoke about the elements of race and colonialism a long time ago. But what I will say, though, is that every person can benefit from having a therapist that's comfortable talking about their identity. If the client, if I can speak to a client about their trauma, it's one thing, but you also want to be able to speak to the client about what is happening in the society that affects or re-traumatizes them. We need to have therapists that are at least aware of their own insecurities and their own difficulties and are willing to contend with the issue of race that exists in the dynamic. It's almost as if we have therapists who are not comfortable talking about gender. It's just strange to me, is that the thing is that many more times, I believe, many of my clients are not male. And so I have to be comfortable talking about gender, even though I'm not a woman, or, you know, so I feel that in that same way, that even though the therapist is not Black, they still should at least know about anti-racist psychotherapy. So I wouldn't say so much the pressure is on the client. I actually do it as a challenge to my own field of psychotherapy, is that psychotherapy has some racist origins and like is not necessarily an angel. So I do feel that psychotherapy has to, in a way, like confront the elements of itself that are perpetuating the racial disparities that exist in our society. So while I won't say that every single client needs to seek, like every single person needs to seek out an anti-racist psychotherapist who has an afro and has a goatee, because they don't need to go and see me. What I will say is that in our field, we definitely need to address the gaps that exist, and we definitely need to think seriously when we're talking about decolonizing this whole thing.
Yeah. And I asked that question also because as a Black person, I feel like it is so inevitable for you to feel some kind of, not necessarily racism, but the systemic injustices that are around. But people, I understand as well, deal with it very differently and are able to, I guess, soothe themselves, or be able to deal with it much different than somebody else. So
Sure.
I understand that maybe not everybody, but I almost feel like everybody kind of needs some kind of awareness or somebody like you in their life that are able to kind of articulate things in a way that we can be like, okay, I'm normal for thinking this, or for.
Well, I appreciate that, but just to know that I'm just a mere reflection of the person I'm speaking to right now. So it may not necessarily be that they need like me, but since you're a person who's aware of it, even being able to speak to other people who are interested in talking about race, speaking to other people who are just at least open to the possibility that maybe skin color affects something in a society that privileges white people and privileges men and privileges violence against people who don't look like that. I think that it can benefit, but I also am very interested in decolonizing as well. So that's why I won't say that every person needs therapy. Ultimately, one day, we want to find out a way that the community can actually heal and mobilize itself. Right. That it doesn't need to be healed by people who have fancy alphabet letters after their names. Like it doesn't, that's the decolonization that is that's of interest to me, is how do we make it so that that we remember that even like Black people, that we have a history of being healers. When we speak about Black history, there's this problem that takes place, is that many times you'll hear people that will say that we are descendants from slaves. And they will say that, like from the beginning, we were born on the water. From the beginning, we are slaves. And it's like, this is
not true at all, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we have to understand that our Blackness and our identity was actually interrupted. Who were our ancestors before enslavement? Who were our ancestors before white people got in the picture? And that's of interest to me. So I'm very interested in how do we get in touch with that aspect of ourselves, the ancestors who not only like built the pyramids, because that's a nice part, but also the ancestors who are also some of the first people who developed arithmetic, some of the first people who developed like medicines. When we hear of I think it's the Hippocratic Oath, that that people who work in the medical field are to follow, of just making sure that the first thing that we do is just to make sure that we're not causing harm to others. Where did he learn that from? Because it's strange that there's some papyrus, the plural form of it, but there's old like scriptures and all that represent this in ancient times that were from like the African continent. So because I am a person who works with racial trauma and works with people who suffer from PTSD, the person who has PTSD, many times they have an aversion to their past, or that there's something that happened in their past, so they feel they need to block it out. But I feel socially in our society, we have this blockout thing that took place too, is that the injury of racial trauma, the injury of chattel slavery, made it so that we block out the rest of who we were before the injury took place. So if we are really serious about decolonization, if we're really serious about Black history, then we have to speak about all of Black history, starting with mitochondrial Eve, starting with the first Black woman who was the original mother of our species. That's how far back we got to go. This is a challenge, though, because as Canadians, as Americans, we have short-term memories. We, this country, Canada, was around for 150 something years, but the Egyptian dynasties were there for millennia.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Canada is just a baby.
And can you imagine the sense of empowerment if people know the history and know where they come from and know, and this is for everybody, the whole entire world, like you say, we're all one. So if you know from where we came from, then there's some kind of confidence that you walk around with. You don't feel like you need to be scared of anything.
Yeah. And I feel that that's the work that I do in my therapy, generally speaking, is that I'm helping people to know that there is like an inner strength that has been there from the beginning.
Right.
What happens is when we become traumatized, many times we identify with the trauma. So we identify as saying, I'm a depressed person, or I'm an anxious person, or I have PTSD, or I have this or that. The interesting thing, though, is that when you heal from the symptom, who are you then? Who is the person who is able to heal from the depression? Who is the person who is able to heal from this label that has been given to them? And when we are able to reduce those symptoms, a person gets much closer to who they are meant to be, which is, it's a mystery, and it's easy for me to talk about it. But because I'm an experiential therapist, it's about creating these experiences in the session, of letting people know that they are able to tune into something that is much, much greater. Because if we are to make it that the Black person is to know that they are much more than the Super Bowl, seeing people singing and dancing and seeing a white person kneel and taking credit for a social movement, if once we're able to know that we're much more than these things that are in our present day society, and we start to tune into the fact that we are some of the original healers, that we are descended from people that have been around for a long time, and that there's a rich culture that's there. When we're able to separate the African Canadian from just being only in Canada's short-term memory history of 150 years, I think something beautiful happens when we can connect really with our ancestors.
Yeah. And you strip it down to that resilience that you talk about. It's being stripped down, and yeah. So my second question is something that I believe you coined, and I want you to explain. Can you explain what binary complex trauma cycle is? So the binary complex trauma cycle is a simple, kind of simple thing. It's a mouthful. Should have found a simpler way of explaining it, but it's just the idea that in our society is made up of a lot of binaries that exist. The binary of good and evil, the binary of black and white, of straight and gay. Like we have all of these binaries that tend to be quick ways of being able to say like what a person is. And there's some strength in being able to have like judgments in that way, that we can look at a person and say, and know something about them before they open up their mouths. We need to know certain types of information. The problem, though, is that a lot of these are socially constructed. So when we look at the binary complex trauma cycle, which I first wrote about in Anti-Racist Psychotherapy, but then first put the words to it in Black meditation, it's that on one side, you're going to get this thing called white supremacy. And on the other side, you're going to get this other thing that's called Black suffering. Both of these are actually myths. None of these are real, but they're created. So what happens is that the white person, or the person who identifies with the characteristics of whiteness, that they must be strong all the time, smart all the time, that they must be perfect all the time. In a way, in order to maintain this fallacy, you have to kind of create the opposite. You have to know who your enemy is, and you must project all the traits that you don't like, being lazy, hypersexualized, thieves, violent, whatever it is that people project into Black people. And you must install that into Black suffering. When it is in Black, the idea of Blackness, that our music is bad, that our food, it's too spicy, I don't know,
and all these criticisms that are into Black people, then we are able to then say, this is what Black people are. Black people are this terrible thing. When the Black person identifies with it and believes in this lie, then in a way they validate white supremacy. So if the Black person believes, okay, well, since we're bad, we're going to call ourselves the N-word and all of this stuff just to, you know, to really like stick it to them and all that, and like say that we're using a term that white enslavers used on us. And when we identify with that, it makes it so then white people can feel a bit better about themselves, that they can feel that, yes, we are more intelligent because look at them, this is all that they do, blah, blah, blah. The problem, though, is that the binary complex trauma cycle exists with whiteness and Blackness, but it also exists with male and female. So with men, you're also going to get male dominance versus female submission. And the idea of what it means to be a man and the idea of what it means to be a woman, these are also socially constructed. When they say that a man does this type of job and a woman does this type of job, these are things that are completely constructed. They're not real. They're just things we have told ourselves stories about. So the binary complex trauma is just to explain that there is this dichotomy, there's this battle that exists that does not cause any strength for anybody who's involved in it. The Black person does not benefit from believing these lies about themselves. The white person cannot benefit from believing that they are the best at all times because it's false. No one can be absolute anything. The human is never going to be either 0 to 100. Everyone is always a little bit gray in between. Everyone is always in between the spectrum rather than these absolutes. So binary complex trauma is just to explain that there are these opposing dichotomies, these north and these souths, and just saying that we actually are much more, it's much more complex than the lie that we are often told. And these lies are many times at the source of many of our mental health issues as well. Trying to live up to an expectation or trying to fight away from being another expectation instead of being somewhere along the middle, which is the awareness and the centeredness that I speak about in Black meditation.
Right. Thank you for that. Yeah, there's a deep sense of awareness that needs to happen in order for us to really understand it, this concept. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So my third question, and I'm going to quote again from your amazing book.
Thank you.
While
and the book, if I can just say one thing about the book, sorry to interrupt your question, but the book is really, it's from the people I've met. Even at the end, I wanted to just highlight other meditators that I met, just to know that like, I couldn't have written this without a community of people. So I couldn't have listed everybody's name on the book. I had to only put mine, but because I did write it, but this came about because of Black people. And this is really dedicated to all the great people I've met. But yes, please.
Yeah, and just the fact that you say that it's again solidifies the fact that I've made a great choice, a great decision in choosing you to come, because there's a sense of mindfulness when we know that we co-create things. I find it so beautiful that when people are aware of that things that gets downloaded to them in their brain is not their own. It comes from a collective. So yeah, thank you for saying that.
Thank you.
So the quote I wanted to read was, while a radical systemic change is the solution for systemic racism, a deep and complete acceptance of the self is conducive to standing up for what is right, all the while loving the skin that we are in. So I wanted to touch on systemic change and what else we can do to create that change.
Yeah, sure. So, well, there's I think the oldest technique in the book is divide and conquer. And so Black people have been impacted by this. So the way how we've been impacted is that I'm a Jamaican. So completely, I'm a Black Jamaican Canadian, middle name African, okay? Because the African part is essential, that people have to know where we all came from. Even white people, that they came from Africa. And that race differentiation, these different shades and complexions came from Africa. Then like, the variety of genetics is in Africa. Like that all started there. We spent thousands of years in Africa before we went to Europe and Asia and all that. That's number one. When I'm going to say that I'm a Jamaican, when I was younger, it used to happen more, but it doesn't happen as much now. I'd be Jamaican and then Haitians would be over there. Or then I'm Jamaican and then like people from Nigeria are over there. And it's like, I'm a Black Canadian and then African Americans are over here. We're all separate. Yeah. So I really just believe that when I say systemic change, I do mean that we're all part of a working system that's there. If we are all united under one flag of like, whether it's humanity, whether it's Blackness, there's much more strength that we're capable of. There are some people that even though they're Black, I might have said it in the book as well, I didn't invent this, but not all skin folk are kinfolk. So that means just because you're Black, it doesn't mean you're going to see the other person as a brother or a sister or as a family member. And that is part of this idea of white supremacy, is that we need to be separated and fragmented. We need to make it that we focus a lot on gender so that we'll say these ideas of Black men are this and then Black women are this, which don't appear in any other race. I haven't seen like that much animosity in other races when I've spoken to other people. But all of this is because like, if we do unite, like it's fini, man, it's done. It's done. If we're all like, yo, like we love ourselves, we love who we are meant to be at the deepest level, that we like care about the family unit and all of that, instead of buying into these lies that are always said about Black men and Black women, that is a way of uniting our system. When we are able to come together as a community without, you know, the hype and all the stuff that happens in our city and maybe other cities as well, is that it's more a popularity contest, it's more who you know and if you have the degrees and all of that stuff. If we're able to unite under one flag, it increases our ability to influence other systems. But the problem is that because we're so divided and there's divided interest, especially the divided interest of capitalism, like that some people must make a certain amount of money before they consider themselves as a real human being. Other people are lesser than human because they don't make the certain amount of money. There's all of these divisions that just exist. So when we are able to unite the system, then it increases the potential for systemic change. It's the only reason why the whole world mobilized after the George Floyd protests, because everybody in their heart was like, yo, this is wrong. And that was the scariest thing, scariest thing. So what happened is the great white lash. What happened right after that is that every company all of a sudden was wearing kente cloth. Every single company was like, you know what? We need to have a diversity, equity, and something person. And they must be Black and they must be dark skinned. And so this is a way of making it so that they could kind of like make it that, no, we're not that racist. And so there were a few concessions that were made. And then people went right back to sleep. People went right back to being like, okay, let's not talk about wokeism. Let's not talk about these types of things. Let's get right back to everyone being divided about this topic. So when we are able to come together, we are able to work more efficiently. When we're able to treat the pain and suffering that we have inherited in our family systems, we are much more effective as a unit. When we're able to know that the only way that we can save ourselves is if we save everyone else at the same time, then we become united in our shared humanity and the shared value of our collective success and our collective progress. If we do want to actually make it so that systemic change happens, then we have to start to target it instead of saying it's only police officers that are racist, or it's only those racist nurses who took away the life of Joyce. When we start to see that the struggle that the Indigenous person has may be different, but is still related to the struggle that the Black person has, and that racism is still related to the anti-Asian hate that takes place, and that discrimination is related to anti-Semitism, and that even anti-Semitism is related to Islamophobia. When we're able to really unite, then we realize that the racists are actually outnumbered. There's more of us.
Unstoppable. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's more of us that are actually on the side of good that are there. But because we got
Absolutely.
caught up in these binaries, we've confused ourselves.
Yeah.
So it is about demystifying ourselves. It is about learning to love ourselves so then we can more easily love others.
Yeah, very well said. I totally agree. And when you were talking about Jamaican and Haitian on one side or the other, all I could think of is I was so in the middle because my father is Haitian, my mom is Jamaican.
Yes.
So, I could so see it when you were saying it. I'm like, yeah, I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know where to go. So I just
Yeah.
in the middle.
Yeah, but I wish that I knew when I was younger, just being like, yo, Haitians are some of the first freedom fighters, man. I wish I
Yes.
understood that. And even
Yeah.
just knowing like Barbados, this is the first place where they put the suffering of the enslavement, where they tried it out first on our Bayesian brothers and sisters. Then if we were all, because the only reason why chattel slavery and all that took place is because even Africans too were kind of scattered. They weren't like, oh, like that they're attacking all of us. They were like, oh, okay, well, it's these people that are doing this too and all that. So if we're able to come together with one consciousness, I just think that we're stronger as a group of people.
Yeah, and just the fact that you say you wish you knew, I feel so deeply that our education system needs to drastically change in order for young people of all colors to understand the roots of humanity, because we are
Yeah.
such a baby as a species. And so I feel like it has not been tapped into deep enough for young people to understand where they come from and to understand the love that they should have for themselves and
Mm-hmm.
for everyone around them.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that's why, as a therapist and as a Black man, I think it's very necessary to have like anger, but also a righteous anger. Is that when you asked me about what it is that made me write the books, it really wasn't anger that I had. I was really frustrated with the system and I wanted to do something. And through that anger, I was able to mobilize myself to diligently write and to just think and meditate on the idea of how do we liberate ourselves from the cycle of suffering. And it's really that, is that we are doing this. We need to do this so that the next generation has it easier than us. This is the
Yeah.
impetus. The reason is we have to move away from these ideas of building up individual statues about people. We need to think about how can we make it, instead of worshiping one person that we will give the label of being important, how do we make it so that the next generation suffers less? How do we make it so that we rid the world of the climate change problems, that these ridiculous wars that is with Russia and Ukraine? How do we make it so that we're able to just reduce the suffering that is taking place in the world? And if we are committed to this, instead of trying to toot our own horn and all that stuff, if we're committed to these things, we can definitely deal with this in a generation. But the problem is we're too fragmented. The ego is very strong. So the book Black Meditation, it leads us in the idea of knowing that we are to address through awareness the ego, and also through our hearts the community, of finding out ways that we can learn to heal ourselves. That's kind of it.
Yeah. And again, that's why I love the book. That's why I love the way you approach and the way you think of things, because it is really clear in conversations that we have with you that it is about unity, about us coming together in order to make a difference. It's a good segue as well to my last question, which is regarding our children and how can we engage in conversations like this with our children, and just let them know that this exists, racism exists, and how to be mindful and how to work together, or just how to even approach these conversations.
Okay. So, so I don't know the one approach to use, but what I can say though is, if we're talking about kids, then we move in baby steps. And like before the child can run, the child must walk. Before the child walks, it must crawl. And before it crawls, then we must be like compassionate to it. I sometimes I have conversation. I like philosophy. I like talking about stuff with people, And there was someone who was talking to me about saying that they feel that the way how the world is that we are predisposed to war and we're predisposed to anger and all these things. But I don't believe that, because a baby cannot exist in this world without a parent or without someone who cares for it. And evolutionarily then, what encourages our survival is us coming together, us being warm with each other, us defending each other from difficulties and challenges. I think that one of the best ways of being able to help the child is just to let them know that people are different, but that we still love you. You know, of just letting children know that, you know, the L word is not so bad. That love is not a bad thing. And just knowing that there's love that's going to be for like being close, and then love in terms of protecting others and like fighting for what's right. I mean, the thing is that there are forces of good that are out there. So that's why whenever I speak to people and they want me to talk about racial trauma, I'm going to say the flip side of racial trauma is just like a coin, is that there's the resilience on the other end as well. So if we are speaking to our children about difficulty, then we also want to make sure that we are ending the conversation on the strength and resilience that allowed us to be here in the first place.
Absolutely.
That there's people who fought for us to be here that are no longer here. There are our ancestors, so that we're never really alone.
Let's draw our strength. Yeah. Draw strength from them. Yeah.
100%. So I don't know the best answer, but I will say that there's the love, and I'm not talking about no romantic love, no Hollywood love. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a deep love for our people. I'm talking about a deep, deep love for the continuation of our humanity and the continuation of our of the story of what's next to be.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, for these answers. You are a brilliant mind. I know I just love talking to you. I think we could talk for hours because these are such important conversations, I feel, that need to be had on a regular basis and not let it die down, and, perhaps not even wait till Black History Month to talk about it, because it is extremely important that if it's not in our school systems, we speak about it enough that, it reaches the right ear, so that, okay, maybe these things should be in our systems, so that, people can learn about how we really began and how resilient we are.
For real, yeah. Because as a therapist, there's an aspect of knowing, there's doing, and there's also being. And I think that that's part of just the trajectory of Black liberation and racial justice as well, is that there is knowledge, there is like things that we need to do, but there's also that aspect of who we are and who we are trying to be, which I feel is my main emphasis that I'd like to contribute to helping other people to fight for that love that I was talking about.
Yes, thank you so much, David. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate you too.
Yes, I will be showcasing the book everywhere, because I feel like there's so many other quotes that I could have used, and like you said, that you used some people in the book, and there were some beautiful passages that kind of show how those aha moments when you are in therapy with somebody and they realize, that's what, and so I encourage people to just read the book because it's powerful.
Yes, much appreciated. Thank you so much. Many blessings to all of your listeners as well.
Thank you. Blessings to you too. As always, I thank you for tuning in. These episodes are meant to be of massive value to you, and so I hope you got something out of it. And if you did, all I ask in return is for you to give it a thumbs up, give it some love in the reviews, share with one or two friends whom you know will benefit from hearing this content. Check out the links in the description. Continue to lead with empathy, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Many blessings.